Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us for another Startup Canada webinar of the Women Entrepreneur Series. For those that haven't participated in this webinar series before, Startup Canada launched the Women Entrepreneur Program to provide support during COVID-19, but also to provide general guidance to entrepreneurs in starting and scaling their businesses and all the moving parts that it implies. For the ones that don't know me, I am Maria Ponte, Program Manager at Startup Canada. And I'm thrilled to present Connie Stacey, President of Growing Greener Innovations today, an innovative organization dedicated to giving their customers solutions for portable power and contributing to a cleaner environment. Also, I'm thrilled to announce here as well that Growing Greener Innovations is the winner of the Product Innovation Award for the Paris region this year for the Connie Awards that are launched by the Innovators Entrepreneurs Foundation, but powered by Startup Canada. I will share with you the link of the Paris region's ceremony. In this webinar, Connie will discuss what it means to be sustainable and how we can achieve sustainability during crisis. COVID-19 has certainly brought us the term to all of us, the term crisis, to the top of our minds, but of course, crisis can come in different forms. And Connie will share how sustainability can give you an advantage during a crisis and can give you definitely a competitive edge. So Connie, it is a delight to have you here sharing all your wisdom about the aspect of every business in every industry, sustainability, and how to achieve a sustainable business.
Okay.
Connie, I will thanks to you right now for a brief introduction, who you are, your journey, of course, with Growing Greener, and what we can expect from this webinar today.
Okay, well, thanks so much for the introduction and the invitation to present today. It's certainly a topic that I'm absolutely passionate about. My challenge was trying to keep it to not 2 days worth of discussion, because I could certainly keep talking about it for a long time. So we're going to talk about a number of different things today around the idea of sustainability, particularly as it relates to how we deal with crisis. So COVID-19 in particular, but it could be applicable to any other types of scenarios, and we all face them in businesses every day. So are we good to start, Maria?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely.
All right, well, then let's dig in.
Just one thing before, as we go through the presentation, we will accept questions. So at the bottom of your screen, there's the Q&A button, so you can ask any questions to the panelists, to Connie, and I will moderate them. You can also use the chat function to any other comments that you want to share with us, and all of the questions will be asked after the presentation. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Maria. Okay. Oh. There we go. Okay, so first off, big thanks to Startup Canada for putting on the webinar series, and Coca-Cola for sponsoring it, and our always silent sponsor, caffeine. Okay, so what we're going to talk about today. So first off, we're going to set a little bit of groundwork. What are we really talking about when we talk about sustainability? We're going to talk a little bit about what that looks like from a global perspective. And then we're going to jump into what are we specifically talking about today? What is the goal of this? Not a general conversation about sustainability, but specifically sustainability in a time of crisis and what it means for entrepreneurs. Then we're going to go through some various practices that can help you right now. So environmental practices and business practices that will both be positive cash flow related and will be positive in terms of their environmental impact. And then we're going to end up with a case study of an example basically of what we did at our company, one of the things we did in order to respond to some of the changes that have come around because of COVID-19. And then we're going to wrap up with some questions. Okay, so if you look up sustainability in the dictionary, you're going to get two responses. First, the ability to be maintained at a certain rate or level. So example, economic growth. The second is avoidance of the depletion of natural resources in order to maintain an ecological balance, the pursuit of global environmental sustainability. So the reason I point out the definition is that we often think about sustainability almost exclusively now as an environmental term. was never an environmental term before the 60s, 70s. It was always something about that first definition about maintaining a certain rate or level. So that's something we've always addressed in business. It just hasn't always been about the environment. When we talk about a global perspective, if you're not familiar, what I'm showing on the screen right now is the UN Sustainable Development Goals. And what I find is interesting is a lot of people have never actually looked up what the goals are. We always think it's all about sustainability. It's always about clean energy and solar panels and all this stuff. But the first one, no poverty. Number 2, no hunger. And if you go through the list, you'll find that a lot of these things are sustainability, not just from that second definition of environmental sustainability, but sustainability as how we live, how our societies function, how our businesses function. And there's some tremendous goals in there. And what's really compelling is that the leaders of so many countries came together to make this list. And this was the things that they said had to be achieved for us to have a sustainable planet. And yes, there is things like climate action and clean energy, but there's also a lot more. So if this is of something that interests you, you should go and check it out. There's great information about some of the programs that are being worked on. We're obviously today focusing a little bit more on the environmental piece, but it's still part of that bigger picture. So let's talk about how it was compared to how it is. So before we talked about sustainability as an environmental concern, it really was something that came on, that environmental term, after we started mass production, mass consumerism. So, if you look back to, the 1900s, you simply didn't have the option. You didn't have mass choices. Disposable wasn't a word that we used when we talked about products and goods that supported our daily living. It was very uncommon. But that big ball of consumerism has really caught up with us. And whether, I don't believe in trying to point out blame, it's a path that we have taken. But the result has been we have done some incredibly massive damage in the last few decades to the planet and how we live. So how do we get back to a bit more balance is really what we're talking about. So before we really got into this whole environmental awareness space, what did homes and businesses sustainability look like? Well, it was low volumes of goods were produced. You had to make it work. You repaired equipment. The picture below, by the way, happens to be a picture of my mom's house where she grew up in the 50s and 60s in a rural part of Newfoundland. They had no running water. They had no electricity. They had a wood burning stove for heat. They had to chop wood every morning and go up to the well to get buckets of water. There's drying fish on the dock. That was everything about their life was sustainable because they didn't have another choice. If you had a sweater, you can be sure it got recycled down to your younger sibling. If you had a damaged net for fishing, well, you repaired it. So reduce, reuse, and recycle was something that was just how people lived. It wasn't really until we got to that space of mass consumerism that really changed. So when we talk about sustainability, we're really talking about a path back to practices we already did for hundreds and thousands of years. So after environmental awareness, this is what we start to think of when we say sustainability. We think solar panels and wind turbines and batteries and electric vehicles and lots of dollars. So usually when we start talking about sustainability today, that's where our heads go. We start thinking about, wow, I want to help, but how much it's going to cost? What is the process going to look like? I still have to maintain my business. How's that going to work? So we really had a different change or a shift in our perspective when it came to what we would define as sustainability. So when we talk about our perspective, we're often looking at this idea that it's either planet or it's profit. It can't be both. But outside of basic level 1 computer programming, things aren't binary. It's not 1 or 0. It's not on or off. It's always a question of combination and finding the right mix of things. So throughout the talk today, what we're really going to focus on is the sustainability practices that can help you manage cash flow. I would argue that right now, the single biggest challenge for business is cash flow. So when you talk about return on investment, when it's a longer term, longer period for return on the investment, it has such a heavy impact on your cash flow that it can be a really big deterrent on adoption of your products or moving towards a sustainable option. So, when a lot of people say, well, I'd love to go and put solar up on our roof and reduce our carbon footprint, but it's going to take me 12 to 15 years to see the return on that investment. That's a hard sell right now. Even before COVID, I would say that type of scenario is difficult to sell. People need to manage cash flow. Even the biggest companies in the world today have massive crisis around cash flow, and that's even before COVID. With COVID, that has only been accelerated. So we're going to focus our conversation around how do we do both? How do we be profitable and cash flow positive while maintaining the sustainability of the planet and our businesses? So we as a business, for example, follow the philosophy of a triple bottom line: people, planet, profit. If that's new to you, look it up, get into it. It really makes a lot more sense. And it is, I believe, where our consumers are generally headed. People really do want to see a broader perspective than just the price, than just the profit of a business. The other thing I would encourage people to look into in terms of their businesses and their opportunities is social enterprise, or specifically B Corp certification. So B Corp is beneficial corporation. It's a global status. We're in the process of finishing our application. And for businesses who qualify, it basically says, hey, we follow that philosophy of a triple bottom line. While we are a for-profit business, we will not put that ahead of damage to the planet and harm to people. We will make sure that there is balance in what we do. That's something that you can look for as something that can be a marketing tool for your own business or in partners that you work with. So let's talk about a few practices. Most of this first part should be absolutely so obvious. I hope it is. Reduce waste. I mean, there's so many things that you can do within your business that is print less, use more digital. Tell people, hey, we're not going to provide plastic water bottles. You have to bring your own. We're not going to provide materials that can't be appropriately recycled. We're only going to provide these other options. And simply reducing our waste has a huge impact on our cash flow. The more we waste, the more it costs us. I mean, it is a very simple place to start. And even though it may seem like pennies at the beginning, when you add it up, especially across a big organization, the difference can be enormous. And of course, environmentally, it's obvious. Don't pollute. So simple practices like no idling. I'm not referring to the sloth on the side. That might be one of your employees. That's not the type of idling I'm talking about. I'm talking about vehicles. So it might be that you have something like a policy of there's no idling out in front of your business. It's a simple thing. It costs you nothing, but it has a positive impact on the environment. So it's a very sustainable practice. And there's so many little things like that that you can do. So look for those opportunities. Google it. There's tons of people doing some really creative things in this space. Conserve water. And I'm not sure how many people are aware of this, and I wish I had remembered to look up the specific number, but a dripping tap can actually result in, I can't remember how many liters a day of wasted water. And it might seem like nothing, but you're paying for that. That's something that you're paying for. So not only are you losing money on it, you're also hurting in the environment. So that's a simple fix, and it's something that just makes sense. And right now, for many businesses, they have lower volume of business. So get your staff working on some of these projects. You're there, you're paying them. If you're fortunate, you might even have some support from the Government of Canada on that. So get them busy doing some of these projects that just make sense. Conserving water, improving air tightness of windows and things like that, efficiency. And those are things that staff people that are already on staff that need additional work can help participate in. Sustainable materials. So again, this is one that should almost seem like a no-brainer. You know, are we choosing a material that is sustainable for the environment or not? And look at the bigger picture. You know, we love this idea of you know, trends in terms of an environmental savior. Let's say, I can't think of the right word right now. I'm going to blame the lack of coffee. But if you think about, at one point we were looking at corn as a fuel for a number of different projects in terms of biofuel. Well, it seemed like a great option until we realized that it was having a huge negative impact on the food supply in certain regions of the world. So it's not as simple as, oh, great, that's the way to do it. You have to look from the bigger perspective. What is the material you're choosing, and does it really make sense? Because sometimes, you know, a material that might seem more attractive, like let's say bamboo, but it turns out that it's not harvested or collected in a sustainable way, could actually turn out to be more negative or more impactful than another solution. So look at the bigger picture and try and find those sustainable materials. Now, let's talk a little bit about the business practice side of it. One of the things that I think has actually been a tremendous help in the last couple of years, we looked into this about 3 years ago, and there was very few companies operating in this space. It was almost impossible. But now you can get all sorts. I think there's 2 or 3 really big ones. The one I've heard of the most is probably Affirm. These are companies that you can get their service on your website so that customers can pay off a service or a product over an extended period of time. So if you, for example, have a product that is sustainability related, and people are going, I just don't have money for that, help them out. Make it easy on their cash flow by, instead of saying, spend, you know, $2,000 on this, you know, fancy home efficiency system. How about you spread it out into 12 payments? And it's going to be a lot more palatable for a lot more people. So things like that will really help both your business and your customers. Look for the opportunities where the cash flow savings will outweigh the cash flow expenditures. For me, I would argue that cash flow, again, is the biggest challenge for businesses in the modern age. And I think with COVID, that's probably even more so, because there's just so much uncertainty. People are really holding on to those dollars if they can. Product design. So when we talk about products, so I'm in manufacturing, you know, we manufacture goods. So when we manufacture our goods, we always do it from the consumer's point of view. What is it that we need to build in order to solve their problem? But we also look at it from an environmental point of view. How can we build this in such a way that we're not being overly impactful on the environment? What are the materials we use? What is the process that we'll go through for manufacturing? How much energy is it going to use? Is it going to be efficient? Where are the parts coming from? Are those individual parts sustainable? Where can we make that efficient from the beginning? So when we look at product design or service design, look at it with that perspective of how's it going to impact the environment, as well as how's it going to impact your client. Go local. This one, again, has been a big trend lately. The last few years, a lot more people are thinking, you know, let's go to the farmer's market and buy fresh produce instead of getting it, you know, shipped in from however far away. Those things, as much as it seems obvious, we don't often think about the impact that it has to bring in bunches of bananas from 2,000-3,000 kilometers away versus something that's made locally or grown locally. That can have such an enormous impact. So even though the volume might be lower, sometimes the cost might be slightly higher, but not always. You know, you're creating such a positive impact by lessening the amount of travel that a good has to have. One of the biggest environmental impacts is planes and ships, a big fuel consumer. So let's ship less. Let's buy more local. I'd also say one of the big keys is make your team and your customers a part of your goal setting and your accomplishments around sustainability. Team is probably the obvious part. When people feel engaged, they're going to be more likely to follow through versus something that's just passed down from the top. But the customers too. In this day and age, we've talked so much. Who hasn't heard of Simon Sinek and starting with why? We want to look for businesses that meet our own interests and overall goals. So include your customers, share their accomplishments, get their input, and they'll be more invested as well. So it has a big impact overall. Share those accomplishments and share the accomplishments of others. So one of the things, and this is really about a social media tactic, if anything, but when you're talking about sustainability, it's not enough to just pat yourself on the back all the time. That gets really boring really fast. Talk about what other good things that other people are doing. And you'll find that people want to know what you're going to say. And, oh, by the way, hey, we just did this really cool thing, and they're going to be listening. If you're constantly pushing that sales message down their throat, and it's all about me, then you're not going to get quite as positive a response as if you more sincerely share the accomplishments of those around you as well. So really have a look, be a part of your community, and share what's happening, because everybody wins. Supply chain. So I kind of alluded to this a tiny bit, but when you're choosing parts or packaging or anything related to the service and production of your goods within your business, the supply chain is probably one of the single biggest impacts on your environmental sustainability. So for example, when we're sourcing a particular part for one of our products, we might have 3 potential vendors that can supply the part, and they might be in 3 completely different parts of the world. They may have very competitive prices. They're all within a certain range, all within a certain quality. Well, making the choice to purchase from a vendor who has a simpler, shorter supply chain, that transport of good to you can be an enormous impact. The same product that is $2.51 from China might cost $2.61 from Eastern Canada. Well, it might be 10 cents more, but by the time you roll in all of the extras that come with the delay in the shipments, the taxes and duties, the costs of the transport, all of it, it starts to get a lot more expensive than we have sometimes really thought about. I think that's a really big topic right now during COVID, is that when we look at our supply chains, we have been very heavily reliant on manufacturing overseas. I personally have never really loved that philosophy. I think that it's important for countries to have at least a certain level of their own manufacturing. Here in Canada, that amount of manufacturing has declined rapidly over the last 20, 30 years. Manufacturing is just not a common place to be anymore. But now, in a time of crisis, we can see how much of an impact that has. If you're entirely reliant on products or parts coming from China, right now you're challenged. And not just China, quite frankly, any part of the world. I mean, if you have to bring it in for a long distance, you're going to have some challenges. So looking at that kind of bigger picture of where do we get our goods, and our services, and what is the impact on our business, the sustainability of our business in terms of what happens if there's a disruption to that supply chain, right? It's a really big impact, and really think that this is something that globally leaders of pretty much every country are really looking hard at. Is what we're doing right now sustainable in terms of a global supply chain? Travel less. Wow, isn't that challenging right now? Eventually COVID will hopefully pass, and we'll be traveling a little bit more. But one of the things that I have really taken from the last few weeks was how many of the meetings that I would previously have insisted on being face-to-face could actually have been done by Zoom or other types of web conferencing tools. particularly for groups or customers or partners that you have an existing relationship with, I have found it really easy to deal with my staff who are all working from home and remotely. Getting on Google Hangouts or Zoom or something for 5 or 10 minutes is nothing. It's easy, and nobody had to get out of their chair. Likewise, with dealing with suppliers or customers that are in different parts of the world, right now, if it's somebody I already have a relationship with, I haven't felt an impact. Now, with new customers, it's more of a challenge, but that's something that we can balance as we go forward. Is, do we really need to make that trip, or can we maybe just do this one by a web conference or other method, and give people the option to work from home? I mean, for a lot of people, working from home, it makes a ton of sense. I have 3 children that are under the age of 7. Not sustainable to work from home. So it really depends on your circumstance. But in terms of your business, you're putting out less energy in terms of heating a space, providing equipment and supplies, water, all of the consumption things that a person in your physical building would take is removed. And now they also have more time. So they gain with the option of, gee, I didn't have to commute a half an hour each way or 45 minutes each way. I got to stay home. So now it's certainly not something for everybody, but it's certainly something that we can look at, I think, a lot more and recognize where it does fit and where it doesn't. As somebody who's done a fair amount of work from home, either as an employee in my previous life or with staff currently, I have really found that it becomes very, very apparent if somebody's not doing their work. That's the big worry that a lot of employers will say is, well, how am I supposed to know if they're actually getting their work done? It becomes very evident because you're not getting any product back. You're not getting the results of what you would expect for work. So it doesn't take very long to start to go, that person's struggling and they're not doing very well with the work from home, and to make adjustments. So, look at it. Don't be closed-minded. This is, I think, where our economy and our business has been moving for quite some time now. So get used to it. It's easy. Okay, so we're going to talk a little bit about a case study. So one of the things I think is most effective right now is most important, I should say, is how do we adjust our businesses? What do we do to respond to the situation? Both in terms of environmentalism, but also in terms of sustaining, hey, I got to pay I got to pay my staff and I've got no customers. People aren't coming into my store or my restaurant because we're closed. And I don't know when it's going to reopen, and I don't know if they're going to come back or what that's going to look like. I think the answer really lies in figuring out how we remove their barriers and being creative about it. So I'm going to use an example of something we did. And this is just to give you some sense of how you can be creative about it. So this is something we put together in the last few weeks. So to give you a background, we are a battery energy storage system. So we make batteries, big batteries typically. So we have small ones that people can port around all over the place, but a lot of times our batteries are actually, the size of sea cans, and they're used in industrial settings. Well, when we talk about the industrial setting, which is one of the areas that was really impacted by COVID-19, in fact, we had a $10.5 million contract with the letter of intent signed, ready to go to contract, and everything got put on hold because of COVID. The facility in question has been repurposed related to COVID, and we're looking at probably a year, possibly 2 before that can be revived. That's a huge hit. I mean, we're a solid growing company, but that's a big hit for anybody. So we're going, oh my gosh, this is probably our best margin. This is the piece where we can make the most money. How on earth are we going to deal with this? Because nobody's going to spend $1 million, $2 million on a system when they don't know if they can keep their business open. She said, okay, we better figure out a way around this. So to give you a little background to understand this, with our batteries, what we do is called peak shaving. So for an industrial customer, they pay electricity not only on how much they consume, but at what rate they consume it. So if you thought about it like a tap or a water faucet, How full you've got that faucet impacts how much you're going to pay. And the reality is that, the utilities have to provide more substantial equipment if you use electricity at a really high rate. So that's called demand charges. And for an industrial customer, it's typically, it can be as much as half of their electricity bill. So that could be, let's say, $200,000 a month for a large facility like the one we were looking at. And the peak shaving part of it, the peak demand charges can be upwards of half of that. That's a huge hit. So one of the things we had to do was figure out, how can we make this work for them? How can we make them still want to invest in this product? I mean, we have a fast ROI, 3 to 5 years, 6 on the outside, sometimes even less. We've had it as low as 2 years. This seems like it should be a no-brainer. But right now, going and asking any customer to lay down $2 million on a project is just not going to happen. So we had to get creative. And here's what we did, is we went back and we said, okay, well, what if we kind of reimagined how we did this? We know the customer is going to save every month on their electricity bill by using our equipment. What if we just said, okay, sign a contract with us. We'll use our battery as a service. And instead of making a big cost investment in a lot of equipment, you contract us. You say, we're going to stick with you for this period of time, and we as a company will guarantee that you pay lower electricity bills. So from a customer's perspective, they're going to be cash flow positive because they're going to pay a lower electricity bill. In some cases, that can be thousands upon thousands of dollars a month. They're going to have no down payment, and they're going to get a backup system in place at the same time. That's a pretty big win. The only difference is at the end, they don't own the equipment. We still own it. So this made it very, very palatable for our potential clients. And now we've gone from that $10.5 million contract to probably 5 right now that are in the same range. And we've done that within the last few weeks. And the big change was not the technology. The technology is still the same. We got creative in how we could bring it to our customers. How could we remove their barriers to make it easy for them to participate, to stay a consumer? And this is where I think businesses, particularly sustainable businesses, people who work in the space of environmental conservation and energy efficiency, this is where you can really win. Figure out the way that you can bring it to a customer such that they're cash flow positive. If you can make a scenario for a business to be cash flow positive, you're going to have their business, because right now that's the biggest impact that most people are feeling. So that was my example. I'd really love to hear what other people are doing. And that kind of, like I said, I could go for 2 more days, but I'm going to wrap it up at that and ask if there are any questions. But my final note would really be, when it comes to this stuff, the best thing you can do is be creative. And personally, I think Canadians have a good head start on that. Maria, I think you're still muted.
Yeah. Connie, thank you so much for all of these insights for this business case. It's amazing because we hear from entrepreneurs in our audience about ways to be more sustainable. Some people have the misconception that being sustainable implies not being profitable enough. But it's, as we learned today, it's definitely a misconception. So thank you so much for this amazing study case that you built for us today from real life. Absolutely. Like we would love to hear from our audience today about how are you being sustainable? How are you measuring your progress, your challenges that you have faced in your organization about sustainability? So we would love to hear your questions or any other comments that you may have.
And I would even encourage that if you've got the problem that you haven't solved yet, put it out there and let's see what people can bring back, because I think the idea of bringing in those co-conspirators, if you will, and working as a community is what will help everybody. So share your problem.
Absolutely. Great. We have one question, and it's about how to set reduction goals. Which metrics should I consider? Waste and emission.
You know what? There's a number of different tools out there and standards that you can work by. You know, and there are sustainability experts who focus entirely on that. And I would encourage you to go to their websites, consult with them, potentially bring them on. But a lot of the simple things you can do, especially right now, if you're really stuck for cash, start with just figuring out how you're going to measure, what you can do right now, and what is going to positively impact that. I mean, there are really fantastic tools out there for really thorough analysis of, you know, what is your carbon footprint and where can you reduce it? But the simplest thing to do is just start. I think sometimes the biggest challenge for businesses and individuals when we think about any kind of change, heck, getting to the gym, well, not gym anymore, home gym, is simply that you've got to get out and get started. So the simplest thing to do is start. What can we measure? What do we know we could do better at? And start from there. But again, if you really want to take it to the next level, I would really look into those environmental sustainability consultants and the people who can really help you do some of the things that I just talked about. How are you going to lower your bills? These people know how to do it. And if you can make the case that you're going to be cash flow positive as a result of their services, that's a win.
Absolutely, and that's such a great point, because sustainability, people think, yes, but eco-friendly packages are more expensive or this and that, but it's about how to be sustainable in your revenue model, in the pitch that you're pitching your business, and their cash flow of your clients. So that it's a great perspective to have about this topic, that it's going to definitely be valuable for our audience. Any other question? Yes. So in regards to sustainable manufacturing, what frameworks or certifications do you recommend?
Oh, you know what? Certifications is a tough one. I have found that the information available can be really confusing. There's a ton of stuff. And there's no real, like, here, read this book and it's going to tell you. This has been one of the things that was the most challenging for us in getting up and running, because the type of certifications you require really vary by industry. So, you know, for example, our small units, we have really small units that are 13 pounds. Well, it would run something like a CPAP machine or a ventilator for 3 or 4 days. But to be able to use it in a medical setting requires us to have different certifications than it would, for example, to just be sold in a hardware store. So it really depends on your application. In terms of the environmental certifications, well, I think, you know, looking at your ISOs is a great place to start. You know, looking, and again, you know, some of your sustainability experts, in fact, lots of them just have it on websites where you can just go and, like, oh, LEED standard, there we go. So, you know, don't be shy to start looking around and digging into what is specific for your industry, and ask your colleagues. I mean, one of the most effective things we've done, and not colleagues within your business alone, but other entrepreneurs who've gone through the process. This has been something for me that's been a real challenge. The number of people in manufacturing is quite low. The number of people manufacturing batteries in Canada is pretty much non-existent. So, you know, finding examples has been a little bit tough. So I reached out to a lot of people across different industries to figure out, what did you do? How did you get around this problem? What certification did you need for that component? Because we use a really similar component in one of our parts. And really just asking a lot of questions. And you know what? People love to give advice. So, you know, when it's out there and it's free. And right now there's a lot of people online hoping to help in some way. I think that in a lot of regards, people have come together in terms of trying to address this problem globally, not going, oh crap. I mean, we're all doing that to a certain degree, but how can we do something and help? How can we address this problem as a group, as a community, as a country, as a world. And I think that if you look, you'll find there are lots of forums and lots of opportunities through social media to interact with other people. Ask the question. I have found that people, if you put it out there and you say, hey, I have this challenge, what the heck? People really aren't quite quick to respond. And I really do believe the philosophy of what you put out is what you get back. So if you put out support and positivity and you're supportive of other people and offer your advice for free when it comes to things around business, it'll come back to you. I don't ever do these things just for nothing in some regards. I mean, I do, but at the same time, I know deep down that there will always be the positive impact back, that people will say, hey, have you ever talked to so-and-so? They would be such a great partner for installation, for example. And I cannot tell you the number of clients or partners or suppliers or distributors that we have gained through that type of thing. And so go online and ask. It makes you more visible, and people are there to help.
For sure. And what you say is absolutely true. A lot of people are now more than ever willing to share their knowledge in every aspect. And it's hard, and of course was not meant to happen in this webinar, like have solutions for every industry. It's not feasible. But what you're saying, like talk to people in your industry, get more ideas, because it's true. Like it's sometimes hard for specific industries, especially to know how to be more sustainable. So approaching somebody from your industry and ask how to be more sustainable in this process or that aspect, it's a great idea. And now more than ever, people are willing to share that information.
Sorry, go ahead, Maria.
No. That was, it's a great advice. Thank you. We have a question, and it's so how are you engaging your employees in your sustainable?
You know what? I like to think that we engage them in pretty much everything we do. We have a fun kind of media campaign that we're about to put out with announcing the winning of the Innovative Product Award through the Connies. So we're pretty excited about that. And we ask everybody to participate if they want to. And it's really a part of our culture here. Everybody participates. I can't say that we've done something specific to COVID. It's just always been a part of our philosophy here. And I think it's part of what makes us a really successful team is, we absolutely love working together. I mean, the hardest part for this for me was not getting to spend my days with these people, because I just adore them. They're wonderful to work with. Yeah, that's the hardest part for me is not being able to see them, to spend my lunch hours with them. So I feel that for us, it was already there. But I think if I were to start from a different place, if I were to come in to a new organization and try to build that, I'm a big believer. I don't know if anybody else follows, but I'm a big believer in Brene Brown's philosophy around vulnerability. And that when you put yourself out there and you ask for support and you don't pretend to be bulletproof, you get the engagement. People will come back and say, hey, I have an idea. One of the biggest things that really led me to making the decision to start my own business was I always had a little bit of a kind of inkling I wanted to do it. And part of it came from the fact that so many organizations I worked for, I'd have ideas and ways I wanted to help, and it was never heard. Nobody ever gave me the chance to say, what if we tried this? I remember I was in IT for many years and built it as a software manager, building custom applications. And I remember being at one company, and the R&D department came and said, we want to have a special piece of software where people can, put in their ideas and we can track it and stuff. And I was like, that's fantastic. And they're like, but it's only for the R&D department. What? That seemed to me utterly ridiculous. I was so excited that we could share our ideas. But so often we really don't. So be vulnerable, reach out and say, hey, how do you think we can solve this problem? What do you think we can do better? Because I think when you put down that shield of pretending to be bulletproof as the president or the owner or the manager or the director, people respond well. They really do.
That is true. Thank you so much, Connie, for all these amazing insights. Any other question from our audience before we wrap up with Connie? I don't think we have more questions. So if we don't have more questions from our audience, we can wrap things up. Thank you so much, Connie, for this amazing presentation. Thank you for taking the time to share this wonderful advice with us. To our great audience, thank you so much for joining us in the Women Entrepreneurs webinar series today. We hope you got valuable insights about how to achieve sustainability while remaining competitive in your industry. Please stay tuned for our next webinar, Financial Literacy Among Women Entrepreneurs by Dr. Alan Reading, Professor Emeritus of Finance from Telford School of Management, next Thursday, May 14. This webinar series will be recorded and uploaded under the Women Entrepreneurs Program section in the SARP Canada website. Thank you for joining us today. We'll see each other next webinar next Thursday. And thank you so much for attending this webinar.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Connie. Bye. Have a great day.
You too.